A very good morning and welcome to Newsline, live from the Newsfirst studios here in Dawson Street in Colombo on what turns out to be a very wet day. Joining me this morning is, as usual, Bandula Jayasekara, senior journalist and former diplomat. Very good morning to you.
Morning to you, Faraz.
And are you fully recovered?
No, still recovering.
Recovering.
It's like this commissions, committees, there's a process.
There's a process. And we're delighted to have with us the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Vijay Wadna. Very good morning to you.
Very good morning to you, Faraz.
And thank you for being on our show.
It's my pleasure.
Faraz, also if you, with your permission, I think it's good for us to pay a tribute to Rex De Silva.
Indeed.
The late editor of Sun and Weekend who passed away yesterday. He was an institution. And Sun and Weekend, it was sealed under Mrs. Bandaranaike's time. I still remember how the posters came, said Sun rises again. These are real great veteran journalists. I thought I must bring it to you.
Indeed, a great contribution to journalism in Sri Lanka. And we're delighted to acknowledge his contribution to the fourth state.
Definitely.
Sri Lanka has sort of gotten used to and is recovering from the resignation of our Minister of Law and Order, Mr. Tilak Marapena, who stepped down in connection with the avant-garde controversy. However, accountability and responsibility doesn't end with the resignation of Mr. Marapena, however rare that was, and we do acknowledge that. And it's very good to note that the President has acted decisively and clearly has told his Prime Minister that he's not going to suffer any more fools gladly. However, there are other matters that appear to be being swept under the carpet. One such matter is the central bank bond issue. This is the bond, if you will recall, which was issued for a period of 30 years at an extraordinarily high interest rate as to what was prevailing at the time. To make matters more complicated, a company connected to the governor of the central bank appeared to be the biggest beneficiary. Permit us to take your mind back and let us play a clip from the past. Are we able to do that?
During the election, presidential election time, we had pledged a transparent and level playing ground was to be initiated there in financial market. But because of this transaction there in central bank, that transparency issue as well as the level playing ground and the trust and the social capital, which is the base of this financial circuits, has been now somewhat destabilized and somewhat tarnished. So the entire government is being blamed. So we have to restore this trust and level playing ground and the transparency there in financial market. In order to do that, we have to take stern action, especially to investigate this transaction. And also, I think in order to restore the trust and social capital there in financial market, the central bank governor should be resigned, and also there should be a transparent, impartial investigation into this transaction. Unless otherwise, you can't move this economy.
There we heard the Minister Partali Champika Ranawaka expressing his absolute distaste and almost disbelief in what has transpired. We also have a clip of the Governor of the Central Bank speaking to Newsfirst Shamir Russell-Dean. I wonder if we can play that clip now.
Mr. Governor, now on the 26th, yes, when you wanted to increase it up to 10 billion,
yes,
was this communicated to the primary dealers?
This was not. So basically, we advertised 1 billion, and the public debt department told me they would get something in the order of 1.5 billion. And when they informed me at that day that they had got 20 billion worth of orders, I then told them that, the government had indicated to me that they needed a large amount of money. And I told them, why don't we take half of that, 10 billion?
And that is precisely the point that we must bear in mind. We have it from the governor's mouth itself, and we have it on record. He says that he was told by the Public Debt Department to expect an estimated 1.5 billion, but it later transpires that they had orders worth 20 billion rupees. And the key word here is that the governor says, I asked them to take at least half, that means 10 billion. I asked them. Who on earth is the governor of the central bank, Mr. Wijewardena, to make a solo decision like that? Is that the normal form?
No, actually, far as what should happen is, because I have been the chairman of this Treasury Bill and...
For 9 years, I believe.
Treasury Bond Tender Committee for 9 years.
Yeah.
I have to explain and clarify the position of the central bank. Central bank is the agent. Principal is the Secretary of the Treasury. So the decisions are all made not by the central bank, because we just forward the information to the Secretary of the Treasury, and he has to decide how much he has to rate, at what interest rate, and at what time. So whenever a similar situation arises in the central bank that government wants more money, what we do is we give the entire list of the the interest rate. We don't give the names of the investors.
No.
We give the interest rates at which the different primary dealers have bid to the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance.
That's the Secretary of Treasury.
Treasury. Yeah. And he will decide at what interest, because it is he who has to pay the interest rate.
Right.
Where the central bank is simply functioning as the agent of the government, and the agent has no business to decide on behalf of the principal.
I see.
So therefore, the correct procedure would have been that the Treasury Bill Tender Board Committee should have immediately communicated with the Secretary Ministry of Finance and got his concurrence for the issue of whatever the amount of treasury bonds that had been issued to the public on that particular date.
I want to go back to this clip which says, I asked them to take 10 billion, which is half the bids that they'd received. It indicates to me when he says I,
me and myself. How can you do that?
This is not my car, my petrol. This is our central bank. This is our funds.
Exactly.
And it sounds me very odd.
It's somewhat unusual for us, because in the case of the central bank, we always function as the agent of the government, and we allow the principal for whom we are working to decide, make those decisions, and we are not making those decisions. So of course, we have a right to, as the advisor of the government, we can always tell the government, this is the government goes for this option, this is the best for the government. If the government goes for this option, this is what the government would get. So that the Secretary of the Ministry of Finance has a number of choices to make.
Right. So he's not limited.
That is what we do.
Right.
And we normally don't decide the rate of interest in the central bank.
Right.
Yes. But of course, if the interest rates are going up, and if the Treasury Secretary wants to raise it to a high level, or interest rates, the Treasury Secretary wants to raise the money at a very low interest rate so that it will be out of alignment with the prevailing interest rate structure, then of course central bank will intervene and say we cannot reduce interest rate below this.
So do you mean that he didn't know the standard procedures? How can you say that he didn't know the standard procedures?
I don't want to make a comment on that, because it's up to the market to decide whether the particular statement is correct or not.
This market, I've had many discussions with different people in the market, and they tell me that the action of this central bank governor in this instance demonstrates an absolute lack of expertise, immaturity, and essentially inexperience. And yet this is the man that our dear Prime Minister shopped all around the world to head our central bank. Why didn't you become the governor of the central bank?
Well, of course, far as I had been a career central banker, having served that institution for 40 years, as you know, Bandula just told me a few minutes ago, he said he was to retire at the age of 55. I thought I should retire at the age of 65. So it's a private choice. And I didn't want to accept any particular position from the government because if I do so, I lose my independence because I am a writer. And if I write, I must be able to write independently without being influenced by anyone.
I mean, so they would have interfered with you if you became the governor of the central bank.
Exactly. So because presently I am making a better contribution for us to society by giving my independent voice, which is being appreciated by the market.
And how come for us then, you should not, interfere, the central bank governor should be free, but there is, like Mr. Vijayawardena says, there's interference.
Well, it shows that he is he's inexperienced in these matters, and no matter how you try to style it out, the truth will prevail. And in this case, the truth has prevailed, and the Republic are the end losers, as usual, the people.
Yes, also yesterday the President's Council, Manohara De Silva, also was saying that this is for us, it's a bad choice, and then that his allegiance is not to Sri Lanka. Yes. How do you see that of Arjuna Mahendra?
I mean, Bandula, what was the occasion for
No, we were asking Manohara about the governor.
Okay.
Right, well, he says that he is following
that he hasn't sworn allegiance.
But of course, I think there is no any restriction for the government to appoint a non-Sri Lankan as the governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. The main reason is our Montreal Act doesn't make that restriction. But of course, I know in the case of other central banks, like the Central Bank of Nigeria, even Central Bank of the Bangladesh Bank, there is a specific requirement that the person who is to be appointed as governor should be a naturalized citizen of the country.
Yeah, what Manohar was trying to say, if he is like what Farah said, if he is like he said what Farah emphasized, that in that loyalty, for the country, this is what.
Yeah, but of course, it doesn't prevent the government from appointing.
Now, I want to ask you this, Mr. Vijayawardena. I don't know if you can answer, but if you can, it would be wonderful to hear your response. What did you do in the 9 years previously? Did you ever have a situation where the former governor, Ajit Niwad Cabral, did he do a transaction where I made the decision, I wanted it increased?
No, it was actually a consultative process, and usually what happens is we have the tender board, tenders closed at 11 o'clock. Then all the information is brought to the tender board by the public debt department, and we sit in the tender board around 12 o'clock, 12 noon of the day. And if we find that we are unable to raise the entire amount which the government wants to raise, what we do is we immediately go back to the treasury. We don't go back to the governor of the central bank, we go back to the treasury and we tell the secretary of the treasury that this is the position of the tender today, and if we are to, because we give several options to him, and he will decide whether he should get the additional money at a high interest rate. It's not the central bank to do that job, because central bank is simply the agent of the government, and the agents are not supposed to make decisions on behalf of the principals.
Indeed, they can't be acting on a solo adventure.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't.
But both now, okay, let's admit Niwad was a political appointee, Arjuna is a political appointee. Don't you think it should stop? I should have professionals, as the governor of the central bank.
I mean, again, what I have to say, Bandula, is that you can make a political appointment, but what happens is whenever a person is appointed politically, once he gets to the central bank, he gets himself immersed in the central banking culture.
Yes.
This is happening in India, Reserve Bank of India. They appoint people who have the political affiliations to the party, but once they get to the Reserve Bank of India, they are no longer the politicians. They actually get into the central banking culture, and most of these governors of the Reserve Bank of India, they have acted against the government.
Actually, when Mr. Vijayawardena tells me this story, I seem to draw a similarity to what used to happen to our Chief Justice. Whenever they were brought in, once they got in there, they acted as the people expect them to in past.
Exactly.
Starting from Neville Samarakun.
That's right. So Neville Samarakun had a problem with JR.
Exactly. That's what is happening.
And so on. When Sarat Silva came in, he had an issue with Mrs. Kumaratunga and so on. And so that's how it should be.
Exactly.
It is a pity that some people forget these things. However, to remember even more things, we shall do that after this break. Do stay tuned, we'll be right back.